The African American Legend series highlights the accomplishments of blacks in areas as varied as politics, sports, aviation, business, literature, and theater. We will explore how African Americans have succeeded in areas where they've been previously excluded because of segregation, racism, and lack of opportunity. I'm your host, Dr. Roscoe C. Jr., and with us today is Woodie King Jr., the Executive Director of the famous New Federal Theater. Glad to have you with us today, Woodie.
Oh, you know I'm glad to be here.
Now, we were just talking about the New Federal Theater was founded in 1970.
Yes.
That's 40 years ago.
Right, and we're celebrating our 40th anniversary, and we're going to have a big gala and reunion, and we are going to, in a sense, honor 11 or 12 New Yorkers who've changed the cultural landscape of New York.
Now, one thing about black arts and black theater in particular, it started in the revolution, the social revolution, civil rights revolution. It grew here in New York and Los Angeles and maybe Atlanta and so on. But New York was a place where we had the New Federal Theater, we had the Negro Ensemble Company, we had Roger Furman's Theater Company. We had so many, Barbara Ann Teer. How did that happen?
Okay, well, first of all, there was a slew of theaters around America, the Free Southern Theater in the South, Concept East Theater, which I found in Detroit in the 60s. You had those kinds of theaters, the Inner City Cultural Center in Los Angeles.
And they grew out of the black community.
They grew out of the black community, they grew out of the civil rights movement, and they grew out of a need for the people who were involved to be in control of their own destiny, be in control, sort of like nationalistic idea based on the literature, based on the theater history, based on those people like Langston Hughes, Ruby Dee and Ozzie, Paul Robeson, who had made unbelievable contributions to the American theater and the art scene, especially the American Negro Theater. Nothing had been done like it before.
And the American Negro Theater started right here in Harlem.
Right here in Harlem at the Harlem YMCA and the Schomburg, where the Schomburg is now.
That's exactly right. And many of the actors that we know who gained worldwide fame, like Sidney Poitier and
Harry Belafonte,
Ruby Dee, Ozzie, they're all in there.
Yeah, it was all in there. Hilda Sims, Clarice Taylor, you named them. They were Canada Lee. You know, it was like amazing, you know.
Now, what caused you to get into developing the New Federal Theater?
Okay, what happened is, you know, try to make this as short as possible because I know. In 1964, after having built this theater in Detroit, we had an unbelievably audience-pleasing play, which is a hit in New York, the hit sense. And it was written by Reverend Malcolm Boyd. And Reverend Malcolm Boyd was an Episcopal minister who, they called him the civil right, the beatnik minister and all that.
Yeah,
you know?
I remember that.
And we toured that play to the Episcopal Society and racial culture organizations around America. And we ended up in New York, and we had the Episcopal Church open to us.
Which church was it?
St. Clement's Church on West 43rd Street, and also the St. Mark's Church in the Bowery.
Yeah.
Those two churches. And the play was a huge hit at both places, you understand? So I said, wait a minute, New York with all these flower children and the unbelievable art scene in the village, this is where I belong. This is where I belong.
So now, you started New Federal, Doug Ward and his colleagues started the Negro Ensemble Company.
Yeah. Doug Ward started the Negro Ensemble Company after two of his plays were done, Day of Absence and Happy Ending, 1965-66. In 1967, he wrote an article for the New York Times, and the Ford Foundation read the article and brought him in, and that was the formation of the Negro Ensemble Company. 1968, Barbara Ann Teer started the National Black Theater. But 4 years before any of those theaters were started, Roger Furman had started the New Heritage.
That's true.
You know, so Roger Furman really, New Heritage Theater is really the oldest black theater that's in New York. You know.
Now, how did you get the funding for New Federal Theater?
And I worked for Mobilization for Youth. There was
Oh,
a
that's
HARU
right.
Act,
Yeah.
there was a Bedford-Stuyvesant Redevelopment Corporation, and there was a Mobilization for
The
Youth.
Great Society from Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah,
That's-
and we had, I think I was about 24, 25, and I ran the cultural arts program.
That's right.
And out of that program, we were just so successful. We went all over the world, Rome, Italy, Montreal, Canada, Expo 67 in Canada, Hemisphere 69 in San Antonio, Texas, Rome, Italy. And we took all these young people who was creating their own art and films and all that. And as a result of that, the director of the Mobilization for Youth was asked to come and head up the Henry Street Settlement. And he asked me to come with him. And so I said, well, I've been producing plays. This is a great opportunity for me to start a theater company. And that's what I did.
But you were also a singer, weren't you? In a,
No,
a
I was
singing group
I
over
was,
in Detroit.
I was a doo-wopper. Dr. Brown, I was a doo-wopper in Detroit and right after high school. You know, we had one hit record and nobody got any money. I mean, so Dr. Brown, we recorded that in a bathroom because the sound was better in the bathroom, right? And a year later, we hear it on the radio. We said, what? What? Isn't that
Well, of course, Detroit has a history with Motown and
This was
Diana
before
Ross and
Motown.
Supreme. This was before. That's
This is
what
before
you-
Motown, yeah.
Now,
This was-
let me ask the question. What is it, or what was it in the psyche of the people in the times that made it possible so many of these young people, most of them college educated, most of them really wanting to make a difference, come together and explore theater? What was it?
Well, it was like anything else. It was a form of expression. You either had to write books, and you could not surpass the unbelievable dynamism of a James Baldwin. You could only admire James Baldwin, or the unbelievable essays of Ralph Ellison. And theater, when Sidney Poitier burst on the scene and Sammy Davis burst on the scene in films like Porgy and Bess and The Defiant Ones. Remember, that was
Defiant
57 and 58. And a lot of us was just getting out of high school and getting ready to go to college. So what will we pursue? We wanted to be like those two guys.
That's interesting.
And those two guys, I wanted to be like Sidney Poitier. I had never seen this kind of image before in our American culture, in the dominant culture. And so we said, okay, let me find out a little bit more about Sidney Poitier. And find out more about Sidney Poitier, you find out more about Lloyd Richards. You find out more about Paul Robeson. You find out more about Ruby Dee. And you find out about the Negro, American Negro Theater. So I said, wow, this was not taught to us in school. So we started telling other young people about it. So as we told other young people about it and became passionate about it, then more information around the country began to emanate out of those communities because you found you were not alone. You know what I mean? We weren't isolated in Detroit. Langston Hughes would come through. Now he wasn't, we would pack around him now, you know?
Now, this is 2010. Why is it that we don't have a movement like that in the arts among our young people today?
I think it was usurped by a kind of diversity in the culture, the whole immigration of Asians, Hispanics, and Dominicans into America, wanting a piece of the pie, and the pie doesn't get any bigger, it stays the same. So whatever we were doing, now it's like divided up. Even in the universities, there are women's studies departments. Back then it was just, it was that opportunity was there. Also, these white organizations may say, I need money to do cultural diversity. They may do one black play every 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
there's no study diet of it, and so unlike what we started in the 70s, there were very few places when the Negro Ensemble started in the late 60s, when Bob Rantier started, there was very few places where actors, directors of color could actually go and get a lead role where they could invite their mother and father and they would feel comfortable them sitting there. You know, they weren't buffoons. They were playing characters that they loved to recreate. The Denzel Washington was doing Malcolm X or Ceremonies in Dark Old Men, or Morgan Freeman would do The Connection, or direct a play, or Samuel. These places, you know, Lawrence
And those plays are still relevant today.
Yes.
Because they speak to the eternal dynamics of struggles of blacks in a white America.
Right, right.
They really do. Now, I believe you have for us, our audience, a clip of some of the people who were with you with the New Federal Theater. Could we
Yes.
take a moment and look at that?
Okay.
Zora by Lawrence Holder, starring Felicia Rashad.
To the Opportunity Literary Contest, and I won second prize for my story called Spunk. Well, the whole world just opened up for me. I knew I was on my way to somewhere, although I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do yet, but winning those awards, that made it easy for me to be accepted at Barnard College on a scholarship. Well, I had only finished 2 years at Howard, so finishing my schooling, that was a very clear priority, and winning those awards made up my mind about a few things, including the fact that writing might be a way out.
Of dictatorship is unjust, absolute.
When Chickens Come Home to Roost by Lawrence Holder, starring Denzel Washington as Malcolm X back in 1982.
You cannot do this to me because I commented on the death of a man you detest. Sir, you detest all of them. Besides, I made a very honest statement about what I felt. Now, I felt it was my thought, not yours, not the Nation of Islam. It was my thought.
Do you submit?
Yes, sir, I submit.
Good.
That was a remarkable trip into black history, black theater history.
Yeah.
Makes us all feel young again.
Right.
Yeah. Now, Denzel's part was what in this?
Denzel was in this play we did called When Chickens Came Home to Roost.
That was the famous Malcolm X quote.
Yeah. And it was the scene between Elijah Muhammad and Denzel as Malcolm X. And Elijah was disbarring him from the nation. And he could not believe that he was being disbarred and quieted and silenced because he said something about a man that Elijah Muhammad despised.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Felicia Rashad did Zora Neale Hurston at our theater. And this is the scene. It's amazing. She was so Zora. People said, oh, my God, how did she? But these actors studied these characters. They looked at film clips. They sat in the Schomburg and looked at the way they walked, looked at the way they moved their head. These were actors who were trained, and a lot of them trained at Howard University or other black universities.
And Lloyd Richards had a lot to do with
Lloyd Richards had a lot to do with their training and how they would study characters. So when we sat down to watch them perform, you said, wow, man, this guy is just like the Malcolm I remember. You know what I mean? Or the Zora Neale Hurston that I read about. You know, so those were two pieces from the history of New Federal Theater. And it's available on our website, the whole 7 minutes.
What is your website?
www.newfederaltheater.org.
So they can actually see it on the website.
Yeah.
Of course, technology has made it possible for us to see these things. What about the actual live audiences for black plays? And back in the 70s and 80s, they had large audiences.
Yes.
And now, except for a few that might get to Broadway, the audiences seem to be smaller. How did that come about, and what can be done about it, if anything?
Well, I think the audience really in the black community deals so much on word of mouth. And word of mouth means reaching out to them and finding them with all these different means of distributing information. Thank God you have legends here, you know. Thank God there's an outlet in the Amsterdam News and other radio stations. But they have so much and so many varied programs to talk about and so many different things that they can do until that small audience is divided maybe in the 70s, maybe 3 or 4 times. Now it's divided 50 or 60.
But these plays, many of them do strike issues and deal with issues that really are intrinsic to the black experience. But we now have this thing that they talk about the post-racial society, which I don't believe there is. But the fact is that many people get distracted. If it's not an integrated cast, if it doesn't deal with blacks in the general community, rather than dealing with specific issues that confront blacks, it's not a play that they want to go see.
Well, good literature and good stories will always get an audience, but you got to be able to keep them open long enough and pay the bills long enough for them to come out to see them.
I've heard you say that before. That's a reality.
Yeah.
For example, Fences, we came back, August Wilson's Fences, which does deal with some dilemmas in the black community, came back to Broadway, and it lasted for about 4 or 5 months.
Yes.
But again, the overhead of something like that is that you have to have a full house, or at least a 75% house almost every night.
Or you got to have Denzel Washington.
Or you got to have Denzel. That was part of it. Now, tell me about the new play that New Federal is putting on.
Okay, New Federal opens November 11th with a play called Knock Me a Kiss by Charles Smith. And it's about the great marriage that Du Bois, W.E.B. Du Bois, arranged between his daughter Yolande and Countee Cullins.
The famous Countee Cullins,
The
the black
famous
poet.
Countee Cullins poet, feeling that marriage would bring together the cultural elite and the poetic, literary cream de cream of New York.
Yeah, his version of the talented 10th in the black community.
Right, right. And that marriage did indeed bring together around 10,000 people to a wedding.
10,000
Yeah,
people?
they had never seen anything like
Where
it.
was the wedding?
In Connecticut, you know. I mean, it was like
You weren't there.
1927.
Right.
Okay. So it became the event of the decade. Okay, but immediately thereafter, it was annulled to the dismay of all these people who had come there because Yolande found that Countee Cullins wanted to take his lover on their honeymoon.
Yeah, his male lover.
His male lover on their honeymoon. And she could not believe it.
Well,
that all his words to her was really poetic
romanticism.
poetic romanticism.
Well, now, in the play, it's a 2-act play or 1-act play?
2-act plays, full-day play.
Yeah. So the term "knock me a kiss" is something that's been in the black vernacular for a long time.
Jimmy Lunsford, the famous orchestra leader, had a crush. Really, he tried to woo Du Bois' daughter for a long time. But Du Bois felt that a jazz musician playing music was not what he wanted his
But
daughter
Jimmy
to be.
Lunsford was a Fisk
He wasn't
University
famous
graduate.
then.
Yeah,
but he
okay.
wasn't famous then. Now. He was along with Ellington and Count Basie and all those trying to make it. You know, really trying to perfect his music. But he really loved this woman. But he didn't have no big, lofty kind of elocution. Talking about "knock me a kiss, baby," you know.
Yeah, right.
You know?
That
So that's where that came from, you know. so-called hot jazz and bebop talk of that period.
that
You
was
know,
it.
you know, and Du Bois would have none of that. You know, so with her father's encouragement, Yolande married Connie Collins.
And that lasted for 2 months.
2 months.
Now, if anyone in the audience wants to attend, when is it on? How can they obtain tickets?
Okay, it's on November 11th through December 5th
At the
at the Henry Street Settlement Arts Center. That's 466 Grand Street on the Lower East Side in Manhattan. Okay, it's in Manhattan on the Lower East Side.
near which subway?
The F train or the D train, or buses. It's like transportation is
You
very
get
easy.
it's at a hub.
Yeah, it's a hub. You know, and the tickets are available through theatermania.com. Just go online, theatermania.com.
What this tells me is that when we look at the intrinsic identity of black theater and black culture, black folks have always had this push-pull among themselves in terms of how best to confront racism, how best to improve themselves. That doesn't seem to exist as much now because there's so much competition among blacks to be in the white community, to be successful in the larger social and economic scene. How has that change affected what poets and writers and dramatists are writing about now? How has that affected that?
Okay, well, in terms of dramatists, they are
Yeah.
more into story, more interpersonal stories. Very few white people exist in their work now.
Or in their lives.
Yeah, in their lives. So white theaters are not interested in producing them. White theaters are interested in producing plays that their lives are the cause of that play happening. Something, and black writers don't feel that that is a very interesting part of what is happening within the black community.
But then we have shows like House and ER where they have blacks playing roles that they play in real life, like an emergency room doctor or a nurse or whatever. That seems to get a broader reception in the larger audience because you say the black audience is really just a small part of the larger media audience. Is there anything that folks like you can do to break through that?
Well, if you deal with House or any of the TV series, at the center of that is some white person. There's no black person driving that, you know. So, and if it's not, it's about a police infiltrator that some white person imagines that's black.
Or a imaginary black president saving the country.
Right.
But we have a real black president now. So how is that going to influence what black writers write about?
Well, it's already influencing. You know, writers are writing about you know, the hard plays to do. Obama meeting Malcolm X, and what would they talk about? You know, like they wrote about Malcolm and King coming together. Now they write about Obama. What would he say to Martin Luther King? You know, those plays are.
You're working on that now.
Well, I've read them. I've read them. I've read a lot of them. You know, but what you said earlier, how does this influence our society, our young people, who really are coming out of the universities, trained to be a part of the American scene? When we came out of the universities, because of racism, because of segregation, we were not trained to be anything other than servers or athletes to this. And so those of us who read a lot said, well, I can be something else in this. The young people now coming out of Yale and NYU and Juilliard and other universities, they are really satisfied with getting a job in those industries.
Well, it's important for them to do that, but it's also important for them to know the heritage. And that's where black theater comes in.
Yeah, but a job only means 5 jobs. What happened to the other 300 or 400 that graduate?
That's a very good
Yeah,
point.
you know, 5 jobs. You know, it's like it's only one going to. That system says it's one or two of you will be accepted, not.
And that's why we have to look for collective identity in
Right.
terms of broadening the understanding of our culture, of our education, of our history, and our business.
Right.
Because as more black people become wealthy and own businesses, they'll be able to support plays and dramas and operas and so on that relate to the black community as well.
But that is what I cannot figure out why our wealthy athletes, our wealthy entertainers feel that they have to ignore the support of the Alvin Ailey Dance Company, ignore supporting the Dance Theater of Harlem or the New Federal Theater or the Negro Ensemble, National Black Theater. I can't figure that out. Why?
And that's a good question for our audience to answer, as well as Woodie King. Today on African American Legends, we've been talking with Woodie King Jr. of the New Federal Theater. Thanks for being with us today,
Thank
Woodie.
you.